Hello and welcome to a ZClassroom video on the curve mode. In this video, we're going to take a look at a specific brush found within our brush palette. By hitting the letter B for brushes, we can pull up our brush palette. The brush we'll take a look at already has the curve mode activated. It's the curve editable brush. With the brush palette open, we can click on the letter C. By clicking the letter C, ZBrush will gray out all other brushes to help narrow down our brush search, thereby giving us only the brushes that start with the letter C. Let's start by clicking on the curve editable brush. We're going to look inside our stroke palette where we'll find options for the curve mode. For the sake of time, we'll click on this little circle and drag it over into our tray. To begin with the curve mode, we're going to look at some basic options. Here, we'll have the curve mode and snap mode on. For the first part, we'll turn the bend mode off. The next thing we'll do is pick a color we want to poly paint with. We'll pick a nice bright blue color and make sure only RGB is on and that Z add is off because we only want to poly paint. We also want to make sure that we only want to paint on the head of the alien. Opening up the subtool palette, we can see that the body is selected. We want to select the head because that's what we want to poly paint on. Let's go ahead and close the subtool palette and move in closer to our head. Let's get in really close and put a stroke on his forehead. The first thing to notice is the brush size is set at 13. We can click the letter S for size and adjust our brush size. Let's go with a brush size around 12 or 13. Let's now draw out onto our mesh. As you can see, a nice smooth curve is made, and once we unclick, we get instant poly paint. The great thing about the curve mode is that if we don't like where we drew our curve, we can scroll over, and as you can see, the curve is activated again with a blue brush icon. When we click on this, we can actually move the poly paint wherever we want on our model. We can reposition this and find a better spot for it. We could choose to place it right here. We may also want to change the thickness of the poly paint. We can change this by adjusting the brush size. Right now we're at a draw size of 13, as you can see. By tapping the letter S, we can change our brush size to 5, for instance. All we have to do now is scroll over our curve and click, and the brush stroke is updated in the new, smaller size we selected. This is a great way to quickly change the thickness of your brush strokes, effectively updating curves inside ZBrush. We can do much more with curves. You'll notice that there's a snapshot button, and when we scroll over it, you'll notice the hotkey associated with it is the number 5. Let's click on the snapshot button. ZBrush will now snapshot this poly paint stroke to the model, so that now when we click and move, we generate a whole new instance of our stroke. We can continue to do this by again hitting the number 5, which is taking another snapshot of the stroke. This will allow us to continue making multiple versions of this stroke. Now that we have multiple versions of this stroke, we may want to change the color. By hitting the number 5, we will drop the third stroke down and switch to the color yellow. Now when we click on our curve, we'll generate a yellow stroke. We can position this again wherever we want. For instance, we may want this to be inside the model. We can again change the size and color of our brush stroke. Let's snapshot that stroke again and take a look at what the bend feature will do. With the bend feature turned on, our blue cursor will come into play. As you can see, when we're not live on our curve, we're viewing our regular brush size and stroke. When we hover over our curve, you'll observe a different brush size and color. Notice the blue and the size difference. The size difference is controlled by the curve edit radius. If we increase the size of the curve edit radius and hover over the curve, the brush size will increase. We can also adjust the brush size again by clicking the letter S, thereby making a smaller brush. The advantage of this is that once we have a curve drawn out, we can continue to edit the curve. We still have our yellow color selected, and we can draw another curve but still have the capacity to edit the already drawn curve, making it look completely different than what we started out with. This brush size will control more or less of the curve depending on the size you've chosen for your brush. Now that we've demonstrated using the curve mode with the bend feature on, let's take a look at how we can use the curve mode for poly painting on this particular alien character. Now that we have taken a look at the default settings, let's dive a little deeper. Within the curve mode, we have another button called the As Line. Let's click on that and turn off our bend button. We're going to move a little down the head onto the neck and see what we can create using this brush with the As Line selected. If you remember from our last stroke, we had the yellow color selected. We'll change it back to blue. To do so, we'll click on our main color and drag anywhere in ZBrush to use the color pick option. Once we drag over the blue color will become the active color. With the As Line function on, you'll notice that we can now generate a straight line when we apply our poly painted stroke. This is a tremendous convenience for generating controlled straight lines. Let's see what else we can create using this function. Let's undo and take a look at what can happen when an alpha is added with the As Line on. Let's select a round alpha and draw out a line to see what we can get. You can see that we don't get any poly paint information. This occurs because an alpha is attached to our brush. In order to get a brush stroke, we have to click on our stroke to engage it with an alpha assigned to it. You can see that the visual representation of our stroke is not very different with or without the alpha being applied. What we're able to do here inside ZBrush 4R2 is incredible. We can change the max point settings to 4. This will tell ZBrush to only generate 4 instances of our alpha shape. When we click, you can see our alpha is visually represented by the 4 circular points. If we were to select stars as the alpha, the stroke type would now be represented by stars. Let's go back to our circular alpha and turn our focal shift down to -100 so we can generate a solid color. Let's now make the dot larger on the neck. To do so, we'll have to change the brush size before we apply our stroke to the model. When using the normal brush, we can click the S and make the brush size larger. Scrolling over and clicking, you can see that now we have some nice large circular patterns. To snapshot this to the neck, remember to press 5. Now we'll switch to yellow and select it as the main color. We'll change the brush size to a smaller one and then simply click on our curve to apply the yellow dots. What's great about this function is the ability to continually adjust and move the stroke along the surface of the model. At either end of the curve, you'll notice a round circle. By hovering over and clicking these, you can continue to move and place the poly paint information wherever you want. We'll move these yellow dots toward the bottom part of that neck. That's using the As Line with the bend mode off and the snap on. The max points, again, will dictate how many instances of your alpha you want to generate on the model along the curve. Now that we've started this design on the creature's neck, let's keep pushing the design element by using another method of poly painting. We'll start by turning the alpha off and turning the max points back to default, which is 100. Let's also turn the As Line button off. Now when we draw out a new curve, the poly painting information will be applied instantly because we have already turned our alpha off. Let's snapshot this by hitting the number 5 and move our cursor a little further down on the neck. What we can achieve by turning on our dot stroke instead of our drag dots is generate the same stroke to apply a stream of poly paint information. This gives us the ability to not only drop a single line of poly paint, but also continually paint with the same stroke back and forth on our character. Now that we have dropped this stroke, we can incorporate the bend feature. By first switching our color to blue, let's paint some more with the bend feature activated. What you can see here is a nice change between skinny to large and vice versa, while the bend feature is active. We can manipulate the color information applied by choosing a point on our curve and moving from there. The size of your brush will also dictate how much of the poly paint you are moving around on the surface of your model. As you can see here, the smaller the brush size, we can effectively isolate more detailed areas of our poly paint. This new curve mode for poly painting really gives you a lot of control over creating interesting and more detailed designs. That's using the curve editable brush with poly painting. Thanks for watching the video, and keep watching ZClassroom videos on Pixologic.com.